All right, everyone. Welcome. This is DPF on Tap, Season 3. We are at Episode 4. It's brought to you by Yards Philly Standard. So we're from Philly, drink Philly beer. And also brought to you by Hidden Still Spirits. They are doing bourbons, RTDs, vodkas, rums, etc. So we have a special guest today. I want to thank Brad for coming on. And I'm going to do a little bit of intro for you, Brad, and hopefully I do you justice here. So Brad has a PhD in entomology, went to UC Berkeley, taught biology for 10 years. He also started the Natural History and Sustainability program. He also wrote 2 books, which is really how I came to know Brad. So he has a bestseller, and it is NPR's 2020 Book of the Year, The Wax Pack. We'll talk a little bit about what that is and what it was all about as we're going through. Brad also wrote another book called The Six Pack, where he follows wrestlers around. So this is a baseball-centric book and then a wrestling-centric book. Brad's written in Rolling Stone, National Geographic, Smithsonian, CNN, LA Times, Slate, Discover, Islands, and others. So one of the cooler things that I thought, Brad, is, you've kind of named and founded insects in Tahiti, and you're currently doing biological consulting. So, Brad, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it. One of the things I wanted to say before we kind of started is when I saw your name and then you said us, how to say it, I feel you, Brad, because I get it all the time. You saw my last name with Nowaczyk, so I know exactly how it feels. But thank you and welcome to the show.
I think I should put that in my email signature. I think I'm going to do that right after I get off here. I'm just going to add, it's a brilliant, Thank you for inspiring me, and I wish I had a Philly Standard right now.
Sorry, Roxy would come in.
I know it's 4:00 out here on the West Coast, so it's happy hour time. But thanks for having me. I'm a huge Philly fan, so this is when you emailed me, I was like, oh yeah, I'll do anything Philly.
Yeah, so Brad, let's get into the questions. How did you become a Philly fan?
Well, it's pretty silly, actually. Hopefully, I won't get laughed off the stage when I tell you the reason. But I grew up in Rhode Island, so I should be actually a Red Sox. I should be a Boston fan. Mm-hmm. All Rhode Islanders are Boston fans, maybe a few New York fans, but certainly not Philadelphia, especially in the 80s. Phillies baseball at its worst. But I was a young kid that I never followed the crowd, and so I didn't want to just become a Red Sox fan. And I was about 5 years old, and for whatever weird reason, I had a favorite letter, which was F. And then I heard the name Philadelphia Phillies, and I was like, that's the best name you could ever invent. And then I learned how to spell, but it was too late. And so I just fell in love with everything Philadelphia, and especially the Eagles and the Phillies. Lifelong fan, was thrilled to see what happened last weekend. So,
yeah, Brad, we were born into this, so we're sorry you have to join in the misery, mostly misery.
Well, let me ask you guys. I think it's actually what makes Philadelphia such a charming sports city is that we don't win all the time. I know it sounds weird, but I wouldn't want to win as much as the Patriots won, because then everyone starts to hate you.
We could win a little more though. We don't, maybe not as much as the Patriots, but a little more would be all right.
Right. We're okay with not being liked. That's for sure.
Being on the West Coast now, as you mentioned, how did you feel when Oakland left? Have you kind of endeared yourself to them? I don't know where you are in terms of your baseball fandom other than the Phillies, since you're out there. But how did you feel about the A's leaving Oakland?
Yeah, I'm still a huge baseball fan. And when I got out here almost 20 years ago, actually, in the Bay Area, you had the Giants and the A's. And again, my underdog thing, I was immediately an A's fan first, because the stadium is a dump. The Giants got all the love. So I really fell in love with the A's, and it's kind of convenient that they're originally from Philadelphia, right?
Yeah.
So,
True.
so I was really sad to see what happened out here, and it's a very sad story. Oakland, just down to no major professional sports, and the A's were really fun. Some of those teams, like the 2012 A's, were a great team that like came out of nowhere, kind of like the '93 Phillies.
Yeah.
Bunch of characters that overachieved. So yeah, I'm sad to see the A's go.
Yeah. So it's nice to meet you, Brad. Thanks for coming on the show.
Sure.
Don Carmen was a boyhood hero for you.
Yeah.
So you kind of like the underdogs. What was it about Don Carmen that attracted you to?
I mean, I wish I could pinpoint this because it's not like he has any F's in his name, although I'm sure people used a lot of F words when he was on the mound, back in the late 80s. But, Don was never a star pitcher, but he sort of embodied that overachieving underdog that just went out there and worked hard. And on some pretty lean teams, yeah, he had some pretty good years there for the Phillies. And so I think as a kid, something about him, I just gravitated to him. And then when I got to meet him and know more about him and write about him in my book, The Wax Pack, it was surreal how much I actually related to him or like had in common with him. And so, I'm not someone that's like, oh, everything happens for a reason. But even a skeptic like me had to admit it was a little weird how much I personally related to Don Carmen.
How about it?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of talk about the next couple of questions. We'll kind of talk about. So your Wax Pack book, you open a 1986 set of Topps cards and pick random guys and then travel in your car from place to place to kind of meet and interview these guys. And when you open an 86 pack of cards, you're not always going to get stars. You're mostly going to get what the card collectors call the commons, but that's the beauty of it. So when I was reading your book, you're sharing these personal stories about yourself, which, I love that you're kind of putting yourself out there because it kind of was like, oh, Brad feels that way and it's okay to say that. And it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of authors do that. So I really appreciated that. Were you surprised at how much the baseball players shared when you went to talk to them? And it wasn't everyone, but overall it was.
I think they were surprised by how much they shared. Like, I think some of these guys probably walked away from our conversation like, what the hell did I just say? Right. Because and thanks, Chris. I appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, it's not a typical baseball book, right? So if people want a deep dive into the statistics and what happened on the field in the 80s, there's plenty of good books for that. But this is really like looking at the human element of baseball and who these players are as people. That's the kind of book and to do that, in order to get someone to open up and be vulnerable, like I think I should have to do it myself, right? So part of the approach was, hey, if I'm going to ask you that, I'm going to tell you, I'll answer any question I'll ask you, I'll answer about myself. And so we get into a lot of really heavy stuff, and it was just amazing how many guys of that era. So these are guys that were born in, the 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s, had really broken relationships with their fathers and a lot of childhood issues, stuff that doesn't get talked about in an interview with the press corps and the beat writers. So we all know the famous Bull Durham scene where, Kevin Costner is teaching Tim Robbins how to talk to the media, right? Just 110%, one day at a time. We'll get him tomorrow. So I would basically like lead off, whether I was talking to Rick Sutcliffe or Don Carmen or Gary Templeton or, Steve Yeager, any of these guys, I would kind of start out by telling them that, like, hey, like, I know you're trained to not say anything interesting. So I'm going to call that out, and I'm going to, hopefully you can trust me that what you share with me, I'll be careful with and never sensationalistic. And I was really impressed by how open they were once we got rolling. And I think also when you do an interview, the interview is as good as the questions you ask. Really, that's what determines the quality of an interview usually. And so I tried to ask the things that they were not usually asked, or that would not be the typical question. So if I'm talking to Lee Mazzilli of the '86 Mets, not going to ask him about Game 6, right? But I did ask him about figure skating when he was 13, which is not a question he's getting every day.
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of the key to the magic of that book.
Yeah, I have to say that's a testament to your abilities as an interviewer. When you can get your subjects, your people to open up like that, and that's so kudos to you, because
Thank you.
I've done some interviews, and it can be challenging, especially when they're used to not sharing a whole lot.
Yeah, appreciate it.
But you had mentioned about like Don Carmen, and one thing I remember about Don Carmen is he used to wear his hat kind of high up on his head, and I don't know why that thing sticks out. It's for whatever reason.
He was probably actually like 5'11" and not 6'3", like
it was,
said, right?
Yeah, it was a trick of the eye. He wanted to look more imposing. But I also was a collector of baseball cards growing up, and my prized possession for so many years was that 1986 Wade Boggs, only because I knew it was worth more than $1.
I can picture like you mentioned that in my head. It's like a drag bunt or something, right?
You can picture it, right? It's like him following through with his Wade Boggs swing, exactly. And Red Sox up in the top with those letters. They're pretty much unmistakable. So when you look at baseball cards now, and you see what they're doing with them, with the parallels and all this other stuff, how do you feel about the cards today versus those like the junk wax? Like how do you feel about it now?
So I went to the National Card Show in Chicago in 2021, and I had not been around the card industry in a long time. I stopped collecting after my teenage years. And I still have my old junk wax cards, which I love, and I love pulling them out and going down memory lane. And of course, this is like pandemic time, right? So remember that there was that period where like baseball cards were like just flying off. It was like the hottest thing. Everyone was into their baseball cards during the pandemic. And I go to this card show and I'm walking around and there's like 24-year-old hipsters with like these like titanium black cases of, cards that are behind like a security wall, right? That they're trying to flip for thousands of dollars. It was like being on the floor of the stock market. And I was like, this is not a kid's hobby anymore. This is like commodity trading in Wall Street. And it's like, it was a little disappointing just to see how it's changed in that way. I think that I'm always surprised that, every year, like teams do their promotional things where they give away a hat or give away a bobblehead. That's the big thing now. Like, why don't they just do like baseball cards? It's so obvious, right? Like give everyone a set of Phillies baseball cards and they come in. Like if you want baseball cards to come back for kids, like make the physical cards part of the game again that way.
Brad, I think there's always a difficulty doing that in Philadelphia because if they put, say, Taiwan Walker in that set, the entire stadium's going to litter the fields with it.
We'll be in the toilets.
Yeah, well, that's fair. That's fair.
That's why Bat Day ended, I'm sure, somewhere.
They could just put like recycle bins on every aisle and say, in Taiwan Walker, insert here, right?
The next day, there'll be a bunch of kids in Africa with Taiwan Walker baseball cards.
Yeah, well, right.
Along with those cheap Super Bowl champs T-shirts,
Three-peat,
right?
Yeah,
three-peat shirts. Send them all over there.
Brad, when you did these two books, like you did this, from what I can kind of understand, this is what I want to ask. You did this on your own. Like you're not flying from place to place. You're in your Ford Focus, driving all over the country. I have to imagine this was not only incredibly tiring, but how did you capture notes and keep your kind of wits about you as you're kind of like doing this, project that you loved?
Chris, how dare you call it a Ford Focus? It's the Ford Fusion.
That's right.
The lap of luxury, man. That's my luxury sedan from 2012. No, actually, it was a Honda Accord in the first book, and then I think I downgraded to a Ford Fusion. No, it's exhausting. Like, yeah, I mean, I was not staying in 5, 4, 3, even 2-star hotels. And I did a lot of the first book, especially, like, it was on my own budget. Like, it was rough. I mean, the second book, I did get a book deal that was pretty nice, but even then, it's not life-changing money to write books.
Mm-hmm.
So I would kind of go into this just extreme work state when I was on the road, and it is exhausting. You go, you're tape recording your interviews, and then you get back to the hotel, and even though you've tape recorded things, like you're writing down everything that you can remember that happened, and if you read my books, you'll see it's very descriptive, right? So I kind of like take you on the road with me and talk about what people look like and where I go and some history of the town, and so I'm always writing stuff down and collecting information, and you never know what's going to be useful. The color of the server's apron might end up in the story, or the population of the town that you're visiting. So it's like,
so did you do this digitally, or did you have a field notebook with you and you're like, writing these? That's what I'm kind of curious about.
I had a field notebook. I would also type in my computer at night. When I would interview somebody, I would tape the conversation, and they're probably thinking that I'm writing down what they're saying, but I'm actually writing down like what they look like, all the descriptions, because I have the tape recorder to take down what they're saying, right? And so you have to kind of become this like hyper vigilant, super observant, try to see everything at once and listen to what they're saying, and so you can build the conversation and build rapport and everything. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a very exhausting process, and you got to do a lot of prep so what it is you want to ask and maybe what you're not going to ask, and be able to adjust on the fly.
Yep,
that's great. So, in your interviews with these ball players and these wrestlers, how did the reality of talking to them meet your expectations, and were you expecting to have to pay guys for their time to be interviewed?
Yeah. Well, one of the themes in the Wax Pack, one of the comments I make is that, be very careful about expectations in general in life. Right. And so sometimes I would get in front of someone and have to kind of throw things out the window if they took the conversation in a different direction. I would generally say, again, so part of in both books, there are chapters where I don't get to talk to the person I want to talk to, right? So I never got to sit down and shoot the shit with Hulk Hogan or Dwight Gooden, but those stories of trying to track down those guys sometimes were just as entertaining. I won't go into all the details, but the extreme lengths that I went to try to find Carlton Fisk, for example, down in Florida. And so, the expectation, you can only prepare so much for what you're going to get. And you have to just be ready to adjust on the fly. But again, most people that I met with were very pleasant and open and helpful. No one was like just a total asshole or refused to talk, that kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, once I got in, there were some that refused to talk, period, but the people I met with, they were very accommodating.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask you, is like, I was a huge wrestling fan back in the 80s. I was NWA more than WWF.
Are you from the South?
No, I'm from Philly.
Okay, all right.
I just like the NWA better. It was a better product, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it was more believable. I was 12.
Yeah.
And the Road Warriors were badasses. And they came from the AWA to the NWA. It was like, oh shit, they're here.
Well, I mean, the NWA was real and the WWF wasn't, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So, like, when you talk about, like, when you compare baseball players and wrestlers, like, were the baseball players just more forthcoming about opening up beyond the sport, more so than the wrestlers? And what would you attribute that to, if so?
Oh, I'll come back. I forgot to answer the question about paying guys.
Right.
Yeah, I was surprised, disappointed when the only guy that wanted me to pay him in baseball was Dwight Gooden, and then in wrestling, it was Tito Santana and Tony Atlas, and so that was disappointing. But in wrestling, I understand it a little bit more because those guys were really exploited in their careers, and so they become very kind of understandably paranoid about that. And so the deal that I made with all of them was, if I'm going to pay you, I'm going to disclose that to the reader and be honest about that. And so that was sort of my own compromise. I mean, you're trained in school and journalism to never do that, but if that's the only way you're going to get the story, that was the compromise that I decided to make. In terms of wrestlers versus baseball players, I mean, the thing is that what I realized in these two books is that anybody who experiences any degree of fame, even the level of a Steve Jeltz, right, is going to be, to some extent, forever affected by that fame. And it's just it puts you in a spotlight and gives you a degree of adulation, that anyone's ego is going to respond to a little bit. Right. That being said, like, there was a lot of variation in how well guys had sort of come back and accepted their fame in a healthy or unhealthy way. And certainly the guys that were like really famous had the hardest time adjusting, I think, to life after their career was over, because, like, whether it's baseball or wrestling, when you're at that level, your identity becomes mixed with your job, right? There's no separating Mike Schmidt, the player, from Mike Schmidt, the person, at that level. And so it really starts to mess with them. I think wrestlers they were maybe a little more guarded in the one sense because they were trained their whole career to not talk openly about wrestling being, a show. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, they were used to being on stage all the time and sort of, they're used to talking, they're used to the spotlight. So, but they're also used to lying. So, it kind of ways.
No, did you feel that the wrestlers, like, they were just physically more broken down than the baseball players of the same era?
The wrestling book is definitely heavier and sadder because you read this. I don't care what your politics. I don't care what, like, you can't read a book like that or read those stories and not feel bad for guys that are physically broken, mentally broken, families broken. I mean, the ones that are doing okay, it's just sort of remarkable that they're that resilient.
Yeah,
right. They're definitely the exception rather than the rule. Most wrestlers, they don't do so well in their later life physically.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like just their bodies are shot and their joints are replaced, and and then of course all the years of substance abuse for a lot of them. So
yeah. Now the opening a pack of baseball cards and making a road trip out of that, it's such an original, creative, like, it's such a different take on the baseball road trip. Would you ever consider doing like another like epic road trip with a pack of like 1996 cards? Now,
well, I'll tell you what, guys, I'll give you an exclusive right here on Drunk Phil's Fans, which is, I'm announcing my third book, which is going to make your audience very happy, which is going to be called The 12 Pack: On the Open Road in Search of Football's Ultimate Weapon, and all about Randall Cunningham and 1985 to 1995. And the idea is going to be, there's 11 offensive positions in football, right? And Randall played 11 years for the Eagles. He was my childhood hero in football, and huge Eagles, Kelly Green fan. And so I'm going to pick a different position offensively from the 11 years that Randall played for the Eagles. And those 11 guys are going to be the people I track down on a road trip. And then the 12th man will be Randall because he was number 12.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it'll be the story of Randall, but also the guys that he played with in the late 80s Eagles, and in a similar tradition of the other two books.
That's great. I'm looking forward
awesome.
to some Buddy Ryan stories in there. That'd be great.
Exactly.
So, Brad, you touched on some of the guys that you weren't able to talk to. Were there any guys that just flat out refused to talk to you at all? And did that change how you felt about them because they refused?
Well, I'd be lying if I said it didn't change how I felt about it. We're all, this is the thing. Like, I'm a journalist and a scientist, and both of my jobs, we're supposed to be objective and impartial, and we do our best, but we're all human, right? So what you read in my book is my attempt to be a balanced observer of these guys. But what you're reading is, life filtered through my eyes. And so there's always some subjectivity there. So yeah, like when Carlton Fisk refused to talk to me and kind of blew me off, I was disappointed. I get that more people are asking favors from Carlton Fisk than Don Carmen, but if you read the book, you'll see how his people handled it all, and it left me, and also the other thing is, when you do a book like this, if you do it well, you spend almost a year researching the careers and the lives of these guys ahead of time. So after you've read 500 articles about Carlton Fisk and books and watched interviews, you kind of, there's a sort of weight of the evidence. You kind of can tell, like, okay, this guy's a dick or he's not a
dick. Yeah.
Mostly guys are not dicks, which is great, but it's like in any profession where you could, if you work at the post office, some of your coworkers are dicks and some of them are nice guys, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with baseball players, same thing with wrestlers.
So after, reading the Carlton Fisk story, I could not stop thinking, Brad, that like when he's doing that waving that home run fair, I wanted it to go foul after that. I was like, I wish that went foul. So going across your books, like the nostalgia factor is huge. Like that's something that like really also connected me as well. So when you're opening a pack of cards or you're a kid in the 80s sitting with a bowl of cereal on Saturday morning watching WWE, like to me, like that is like, I love that feeling. I miss that feeling. And I feel like I still chase that feeling. Yeah. What nostalgia factor do you particularly miss from baseball and from wrestling?
Well, you're right. We're nostalgic for that feeling because in our modern society, we get it all the time. Like we get the dopamine hit constantly because our devices give us whatever we want, customized whatever we want, right? So like, I think what we're yearning for is actually a time when you weren't oversaturated. And so I think what these books can bring out is like that thrill of opening a pack of baseball cards and not knowing who's going to be inside. That is such something that we associate with our past, with our childhood, and it's not something that you can replicate with anything modern because we're just, again, kind of numb to that excitement because we have so much of it. So the baseball card, the 6-pack, the wrestling book. On the cover, you see the wrestling figures that I played with as a kid. Those like that physical, tangible stuff symbolizes a time that there was just less, and there were like there were more kind of cultural touchstones we could all remember together than kids today. I don't know what their equivalent is.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this too when I was like kind of like pointing the questions. And back to your point, 2021, you're in Chicago at this card show. There's titanium cases, bulletproof glass. They will never have bubble gum inside a pack again. I want bubble gum inside a pack. That was part of the joy of it too. Like I wanted to get Mike Schmidt. More than likely, I got the Randy Reddys and Don Carmens. But that's one of the things. And the other thing that I miss so much is the organ. Like the organ being played at the game and not piped in organ fake music, like an actual old guy playing a pipe organ in the stadium.
I miss the old All-Star ballot that you punch those little holes.
Oh yeah.
The actual paper ballot. That's another one.
Yeah, that was always difficult because you're like, Mom or Dad, you have a pen or pencil, you're using your scorecard one and trying to punch it through, all of your guys.
I miss I miss the pennant, the little pennants that you used to buy.
Yeah. With wrestling, it's tough because I kind of miss some of the nonsense that WWE would do that they get absolutely clowned on, like Doink the Clown. Like there's never going to be another Doink. It's like that nonsense stuff. Or oh, there's a caveman coming out. He just got thawed from the Arctic. And, part of that was
wrestling got too realistic in the characters, right? It became like if everyone is just a smart ass who looks good and has really good moves and goes by their real name, well, what makes any of them special?
Yeah. You were talking about having the characters on the book, and I remember having that same set with the wrestling ring, and you'd sit there and who was your favorite? The one I loved the most was the Junkyard Dog because he had the chain around his neck, and I was like, he just looked so badass even in that toy. I was always the Junkyard Dog beating the shit out of Hulk Hogan or Andre the Giant in the ring. Did you have a favorite toy that your guy won the world belt title?
I mean, I was all Iron Sheik was my guy, and if you read the book, the first line of the book is the Iron Sheik just threatened to kill me, and it's about my time with the Iron Sheik back in 2005, and then it flashes forward to 2022 when I went back on the road to find him again.
Yeah, did he call you a jabroni or
He called me everything.
I was going to say I think his Twitter might be Hall of Fame roasting. He was just merciless on his Twitter, and it was the greatest thing you'd ever read.
Yeah.
I'd put you in the camel clutch and I'll break your back.
The whole, make you humble phrase, whole new meaning.
Yeah. Yes, it does, Brad. Getting a little bit heavier. One of the common themes across the books is, family issues, trauma, particularly the fathers of these players. Do you think that these issues that these men endured possibly made them better and greater and who they were because they kind of needed an outlet? Or do you think there's any connection with this? Because it was not coincidental. It was so many of these people, Brad.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that I grappled with a lot, which was, and I think they probably grapple with. It's you would never want to have a shitbag for a dad. But if that made you a more focused, determined, motivated player, do you regret? I mean, it's one of those hard ones, right? Would a Rick Sutcliffe have had that edge if his dad had not been a race car driver that ran out on the family when he was 12? To the point where Rick Sutcliffe was not scared of anybody or anything. I mean, when he went to he told me when he went to Dodger camp, and he met guys like Don Drysdale, who were supposedly the most intimidating people in baseball. As a rookie, Rick Sutcliffe didn't even flinch because he was just so hardened by his childhood. And, he was a big guy on the mound, the way he would glower at people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's possible that I do think that at that level of sports, that most of what determines, other than like just, preternaturally out of this world gifted talents, what makes the most difference is all mental. I think at that level, that like, however it is that you let go of failure and be in the moment. And I call in the book, I call baseball players accidental Buddhists, because they have this amazing ability to, they have to be able to just live in the present moment and forget what happened. And that that ability, the ones that didn't have that, I think had a lot harder time making it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think there's something to be said for people who, a lot of athletes, and a lot, even today, there are so many stories of athletes, successful athletes, actually like overcoming their childhood. When I was a kid, I was hit by a train. My favorite baseball player, I lost my hand. My favorite baseball player was Jim Abbott. And the things that he had to overcome. And one of my regrets is never seeing him pitch live. It's just, I can't go back and do that. But speaking of going back, like, when you were out on your road trip, is there a ballpark that you wish you had been able to catch a game at? Is there a player that you wish you had caught at a certain stadium? You know what I mean?
No, I never had the romanticism around the stadiums that a lot of people have. Like, it wasn't about, getting to a particular ballpark or structure. I mean, that's why I like the Oakland Coliseum, because even though it's a dump, like when you get out of when you get up to see the field, to me, like, no matter what, a baseball field is a baseball field. Like, when you have that moment and you walk up the steps and you see that field, it's magic, right? And it's like, I don't really care that whether I have all the bells and whistles. That, give me a baseball field and it'll create that flutter. So, I think, I think, to your point about like that, thanks for sharing the Jim Abbott thing, because I think what a lot of these guys, I think it's easy for athletes to forget that part about, like, that there are kids that watch you and look up to you, right? And like, that's just part of the job. Like, if you're going to get that level of fame, like you, in my opinion, you owe a certain degree of like responsibility to those kids that look up to you. Because it just comes with the territory, and it's like you have this outsized influence and power just by putting that jersey on your back. And I think guys can easily forget, in the moment, that's happening all the time with people watching them.
Yeah. I think if they had a baseball, like a major league for guys our age, the players would be much more open to that idea. I think these young guys, it's hard for them to balance.
Well, and that's a great point that we forget. I'm 44 now, and we forget that these are like young, often dumb people, right? I mean, we're all dumb when you're in your 20s. You're dumb, and again, if you're smart, you're kind of dumb. So I think as you get older, and I think that's why I like writing about guys like many years after they're done, because they have a certain degree of perspective to look back on their lives and their careers.
That's great. So of all these guys, you've had the opportunity to interview ball players and wrestlers. And is there anybody that you built relationships with or developed a friendship with that you still stay in contact with?
I mean, like I said, I mean, it's surreal. Like, I'm, really real life friends with Don Carmen, who was my childhood hero. Not that we text every day, but like we'll check in, every couple months, and generally know, I've seen him several times since I interviewed him. And he texted me like a week ago, and he said he had some fan had sent him the wax pack, which had like almost everyone's signature on it with their chapter, and they wanted him to sign it. And he sent me the pictures of the book, and he said, he's like, I just got this. Like, I don't know if I believe that that's actually Vince Coleman and Carlton Fisk's autographs. Because those are the guys, some of the guys that wouldn't talk to me, that don't come across, that great in the book. So I just talked to Rance Mulliniks. I'm doing a story for The Athletic about Lloyd Moseby, a player for the Blue Jays.
Yep.
That'll come out soon. And so I interviewed Rance Mulliniks about the Blue Jays in the 80s. He was one of the guys in the Wax Pack. Jaime Kokenauer, the most obscure player in the Wax Pack. His wife just today wrote tagged me on Facebook because one of her friends had seen something about her husband, and she's like, "Oh, you should check out Brad's book. Jaime is in the book." And then, the Iron Sheik, I mean, I had the six pack. I had this long relationship with the Iron Sheik where, I went to his private funeral and, I helped write one of the obituaries. So like, I know his family pretty well, and continue to stay in touch. One of his daughters or girls are going to college, and they're going to come out and visit universities out here next week. So yeah, it's been this. That part is kind of surreal, and I actually know these people and their families just as people now.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So when we started this group 15 years ago, Brad, what we've noticed most is there's a lot of people that are friends because of it. They've kind of met in real life and kind of done this. So that being able to connect with something that, it's your work, but it's also something that's a passion. So we, Chris and Butch, I think you feel that as well.
Oh, yeah,
so it's that's awesome to be able to hear that you're able to do all of these things, because part of it is me. I just randomly messaged you because I read the book and I says, Brad, would you consider coming on? And you were like, absolutely. And I'm like, oh wow, that was awesome. I'm like, I
well, and it's and when I try to answer every email I get and every request, try to do as much as I can, because I also am aware of well, that's what I'm doing when I'm contacting a player is asking for their time, and so try to do that.
Yeah, karma's important. When you were on your trips, and this doesn't even have to be someone that's in the book, what was is there something that really sticks with you to this day? A certain memory, a moment, a person? I don't know, when you're driving, it doesn't even, anything that kind of maybe isn't in the book that stuck with you.
In the Wax Pack, there's, at the very end, I go to try to find Al Cowan's gravesite, which he was the one player that was dead. And I'll never forget that, kind of end of the trip, wandering around, that last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where, they don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is going, and in that giant warehouse. Yeah. There's no map in a cemetery that says here's where his headstone is. I just had this memory of wandering, aisle after aisle, trying to beat the sunset, trying to find his headstone, and then finally, not knowing if I would find it, and finally seeing it, and then putting his card and taking a picture, and just having this moment of closure that was really cool. And his story is one that you could probably write in a whole book about. I just scratched the surface talking to his son and some other people about his life, and some weird, crazy stuff that, went down that has never been really told. So, whenever I would uncover those stories like that, it was always exciting.
That's great. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Brad. You're having a dinner at your home. Who are 6 people that they could be dead or alive that you want to sit around that table so you can pick their brains and ask some stories and get some background on?
Well, so I'm talking in the realm of the kinds of sports and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I would definitely have Randall Cunningham. So he is someone that part of why I want to write that book is I've never actually met him, and he was right there with Don Carmen and the Iron Sheik and all that. I would say AJ Feely, which is going to probably surprise people.
A little surprised.
But he's a guy that I always, is sort of one of my underdog Eagles guys.
One of Howie's best trades too. We got a lot for Feely when we trade him to Miami.
On the Phillies side, I'm going to go with Steve Lake, who the backup catcher, who I think probably has a really interesting story that I'd love to learn someday. Let me see who else. I mean, Phillies wise, I'd love to. I mean, this is the opposite end, but I'd like to talk to Bryce Harper. I mean, he strikes me as a guy that is just, there's a lot going on, but beneath the surface with Bryce Harper. Like he just, and I watch him play, and I'm like, man, that guy, like the intensity, the effort, the max effort is just so impressive.
Chris loves his TikToks now too. Making bread and making his mochiatos or whatever he's making. Chris
I'm
loves
like,
them.
Brad, baseball has to start soon. This guy's like going nuts on there, like making matcha latte, mocha choca, and I'm just like, oh, get him in a batting cage quick.
I would maybe Vince McMahon. I don't think very highly of him, but I think he's such a weird, successful guy that, like, I mean, although I think, I don't know, his brain may be a little warped now, but
I'm sure
he would be an interest. I would say even more than him. I would, if you gave me a choice of talking with Vince McMahon or Linda McMahon, I would pick Linda McMahon, because she was there. She's so underrated in the growth of the WWF, and she did a lot of the actual work. It gets none of the credit really, and all the people I interviewed in wrestling, no one said a bad thing about Linda McMahon. Everyone said a bad thing about Vince McMahon. So I think that would be between Bryce Harper, Linda McMahon, and Steve Lake. It's quite the crew.
It's a good crew. Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Steve Lake, that was a good one. I was like maybe Johnny Walkenfuss. I would like one of his. It's another baseball card memory. His batting stance was so obscure and so different, and plus his name is like fun to say. So I'm like, Walkenfuss.
The Phillies should just like bring back the Walkenfuss jersey and sell it at Citizens. I bet it would like take off.
Make it a day and give them away to all the kids under 14.
Yeah, it's like bring back Sid Manji jerseys and Sixto Lascano, like all of those, like in that era.
Sil Campusano.
Yes.
I mean, now you're like, why someone hasn't, figured out that like that's a great, just take like the minor guys and make that a thing,
Yeah, right. Everyone loves nostalgia. That's what we've been talking about almost for an hour. And you throw these names out there, you're going to pack a stadium.
No doubt there. So, Brad, like your career as a scientist and researcher, how do you feel like it aided you in your storytelling process?
Well, actually, I say that getting a PhD studying insects in Tahiti, training for writing a book about professional wrestlers and baseball players, because when you do, we think about journalism and science, they're very similar, right? You have some question you want to answer. You have some hypothesis based on your preliminary research. You go out, you collect data, you use that data to test your hypothesis. Ultimately, you either confirm it or refute it based on the evidence. And it's all about, testing ideas and collecting. When I was out there doing my PhD research, I was doing the same type of thinking and process that I had to do when I went and wrote these books. All that collection of data, and in this case, my data was, interviewing people and analyzing the things that they said. But ultimately, I had these ideas going into these books about one of the things I thought was like, I bet that the less successful baseball players will be more well-adjusted in their lives than the superstars. and that largely was, borne out when I met them. Like, I think I would probably take Jaime Kokenauer's life over Carlton Fisk's. Wow. So, what does that tell you about fame and life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is. So we're kind of coming to the end here. Where did you watch the Super Bowl? What was your feeling like with the Eagles winning, Brad?
Well, I this is really awful, but I was at a buddy's house. They had a little birthday party. We watched the beginning, and then I actually had somebody called a work meeting during the Super Bowl. Obviously not football fan, downright un-American to do.
Brad, that. I got to throw the flag on that one. That's that's a violation.
I had to leave the Super Bowl to go do work. Although I was keeping an eye, and they were just running away with it. So for me, the big one was in 16, 17, when they got in. I flew to Philadelphia just to be in the city to watch it in a bar. And again, to me, that was like nothing sweeter than Nick Foles, a backup quarterback, beating Tom Brady. Like, I don't care how great. I mean, Jalen is great. I love it. But like Nick Foles beating Tom Brady is one of those moments, right?
Yeah, just a great story. Come back to Philadelphia after getting traded away and lead the team to their first ever Super Bowl. It's just an amazing story.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw Nick Foles' tweet, but he said that Tom Brady's lucky he got to be present for both of the Eagles' Super Bowl wins. He must be their good luck charm. And I just thought, Foles defeats Brady yet again.
So was Carson Wentz, right? He was on the bench for both of them.
Yeah, seriously.
And when you think about Carson Wentz, who they flipped for him, it was basically Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, and
Jalen
Carter,
and Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, so 4 essential cogs for a carted off Wentz when he went to Indianapolis. Yeah. So it's pretty amazing.
That's why he's the army of one.
Right. I have Brad's scrolling across the bottom his Instagram, as well as his Twitter. It's at Brad Pack Books, and he also has a Patreon, which is patreon.com/the Brad Pack. Brad, is there anything else that you kind of want to talk about or plug while we're kind of on here? We're excited for the new book, the 12-pack. But I know you're doing a couple other projects. Is there anything that you like our listeners to kind of tune into?
For the 12-pack, it's gonna be a while. Like, I'm gonna really go deep, and I want to spend more time in the research process. So probably a years long project. Hopefully people will check out the Patreon. So what's fun about that is I post a lot of bonus content from my books there, like interviews from the Wax Pack, plus new interviews with former players that I'm conducting just to ask them about their careers. And when I have this piece come out in The Athletic, I'm going to have a bunch of content that goes up on the site as well. So if you love 80s baseball, wrestling, football, nostalgia, I hope people will check it out.
And one of our listeners, Harry, wants to see a DPF Philly book, possibly. So, Brad, this might be a little ways off. I'm sure you have other really important things to do other than that.
I don't know if I want them digging into my skeletons,
Well, but it would uncover a lot of our 20s, though, guys. So, I feel like Brad would be able to put together some pieces that are just I'm not able to recollect. But thanks for so much for being on, Brad. We can't wait for the book. So again, thank you. This was great.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun, very enjoyable, fun to chat, and I'm excited. Spring training is here.
Yes, today. Yep. All right. See everyone in 2 weeks, and thanks again to Brad coming on. Have a good night, everyone.
All right, take care.
Take care.
I think that's let's see.